We all know the components that go into a motherboard, like CPU, RAM, GPU. But what about installing them? And what about all these cables and wires?
Nope, that is a 4-pin Molex. We don't need that. Those suck. They've been around for 20 years.
Oh my God.
It's going to be a good show.
Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe for some more content. Okay, so what's next, Robert?
So what's next is we're going to be building this, and not actually we, you. So this is going to be your first time putting hardware into a computer, I believe.
Yes, my very first time. Super scared, super excited.
You're going to be great. So it's going to be kind of cool. I'm going to guide her along, and I'm going to give you all some tips, tricks, things that I've learned, and explain kind of what all the components are on here as we build the system and get it ready to power on for the first time.
Okay, super excited. What's the first step?
First step is the CPU.
CPU.
So we don't have to start with that first. It's just they're expensive, and people stress out a lot about putting them in. I think you're a little stressed out about putting this in.
Yeah, I'm super stressed out.
Yep. So I always put them in first when we have the motherboard just pure and clean, because it's nice to get to things. There's nothing in the way, and it's just less stress. I like less stress.
Okay, let's do it then.
Okay, cool.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, cool. So before we grab the CPU, if you notice on here, there is going to be a little arrow that is, I believe it is in, right there.
It's so tiny.
His tiny little arrow, and that is going to align with an arrow on our socket, because these only go in one way. So as long as we align those, that's pretty much all we need to do.
Okay.
So I will open the socket for you here. There we go. And go ahead and close the little latch. Push it down, and then to the side and clip. Yep. Awesome. Wow. So there you go. You have installed your first CPU successfully. Awesome. Now CPU is in. Next component we want to go on to is our memory.
Okay. And that is this one. This one.
No. Nope.
This one.
Different kind of memory. Yep. That's kind of what we want.
Oh my God. Yeah. This is my first time, definitely. Here we have our memory. So
this is 32 gigs.
32 gigs?
Yep.
So why do we have two?
We have two sticks because we have two 16 gigs. They need to run on what's called dual channel. Essentially, the sticks run together, increases memory bandwidth. It's how they're designed to run. We could do 4 sticks to either total of 64 gigs, or we could run the same 32 gigs across 4 sticks. I prefer not to soak up all my RAM slots and leave room for expansion. And the price point on these is not terribly bad. So
okay.
Yeah.
So first step, take the memory out of this packaging, and then...
so we need to align it. If you hold it up to the camera so our viewers can see, there is a little notch here that is off center. Same thing with a notch on our slot.
Okay.
So we just kind of line it up, and there we go.
Okay.
Next thing is we need to figure out exactly what slot that goes in, because there's 4 slots, we only have 2. If we put them in the wrong slots or don't put them correctly, either they're not going to pair, we're going to get reduced memory bandwidth, or it's just not going to boot. It's going to be really angry.
Okay.
It's not going to hurt anything, it's just not going to boot. So our manual here says that it is these gray slots, and if you needed to run one stick just for, say, diagnostics, then it would be this slot A2. So let's start by putting our RAM stick in there.
Okay.
So we have a clip on the end. Go ahead and, unclip that. And you may have 2 clips on yours. This one has 1, some have 2. Always little slight differences like that. And just push down. Perfect.
Perfect.
Awesome. And we'll go on to the next stick.
Same thing with the next one?
Yep.
Okay. So align them. They're both facing the same way. We're doing the gray one.
Yep.
And then just slide it in there. Click. Perfect.
Yep. Are we in? I think. No, we are actually not.
Rookie mistake.
There we go.
There you go.
But that's good. I see customers do this a lot when I was on phone staff doing diagnostics. And sometimes you think it's in and it's not. So always just, eyeball the RAM. If one's kind of sticking up a little bit more than the other, or check these little clips. If one clip is kind of not clipped in, just what Sarah did and you're good to go.
Okay, I'm glad you're here to save me.
So next up, let's do our storage. This little thing right here. So go ahead and pull it out of the box.
Okay.
We're using an NVMe M.2 drive. So these are stupid fast. They're about the size of a stick of gum. They run off of the PCI Express bandwidth that your video cards run on. So they're way faster than a traditional SSD, and they're tiny.
Which is helpful. Tiny is always better.
They're cool. The thing I like about these also, they don't have any extra cables. They plug directly into the motherboard. So if you're looking for like a minimalist, clean build, these just make builds easier and cleaner.
Okay.
So first thing we need to do is figure out which way that's going to go in. And just like our RAM, so we don't want to put it in yet. We're just going to line it up just so we can understand. Yep, and we can see that there's that little notch that's off center.
Okay.
And so just put that stick over the slot again, because we need to install something first. So if you notice, there's this little notch here, and there's these little teeny screws on the motherboard. These come in different sizes. This one needs to have a little mounting screw attached to one of these, and it looks like it is the third one, the 2280 size. So go ahead, grab this little thing here.
This little screw.
Yep, and just thread that in.
This one, right?
Yep.
Okay. Perfect.
Yep. So now go ahead and put the RAM stick kind of at an angle like this.
An angle.
Yep, into that slot.
This one.
Yep. There you go. And so we'll want to hold this down with one finger and then put that screw in, and that is going to keep that in there.
I have shaky hands, sorry.
Don't apologize. My hands are probably more shaky. And just make it firm. Doesn't have to be super tight.
Firm? Okay.
There we go. It's installed.
Wow. That's probably the easiest one out of all of them.
Yeah, new computers are actually kind of enjoyable to put together, especially compared to where they used to be. Okay, so let's go on to, we've got all of our major components in. We have the video card. I'm going to save that for later because it gets in the way of our cabling.
Okay.
So right now we're going to go ahead and start wiring up the rest of our motherboard.
Okay. So what goes next? What do we look for?
Next, I like to start the bigger cables to the smaller for a few reasons. That kind of set where I want the cables to path. Okay. And sometimes, depending on your build, you can hide smaller cables later underneath or around those cables just to keep your wiring cleaner.
Okay.
And yeah, I just like getting the big things out of the way first. Okay. So for that, we're actually going to go underneath here. And if we see on our, I'll get this so the camera can see it. The ones we're going to work on are our 24 pin, which is just power kind of for everything. And then our CPU power, which is this 8 and 4 pin here. Okay. So let's start with our 24 pin. That's our main power.
And all of these wires are coming from the power supply?
Yep.
Okay. Wow.
And some power supplies will have these already connected. Some are modular, so you have to connect them. They're all really well wired and diagrammed and labeled. So you just line it up, plug it in. They only go in one way. So it's not like it used to be back in the day when these first came out, these modular power supplies. You could plug it in the wrong way and make very much, yes, a fire, which I've done. It sucks. Okay, so grab this cable right here.
Okay.
And if you see there's a clip on one end of that.
Yeah.
And there's actually a little clip on
That's the clip
here.
that it's going to attach to?
So let's get this, so the camera, we got our overhead camera. So we want to just kind of bend that around.
Wow, okay. This is kind of...
And it's okay to bend that cable.
Yeah?
Yeah, the cables can bend a lot.
Okay.
They're designed to be pretty flexible, even if they feel kind of stiff.
Yeah.
So line it up. And it's okay to get your hands a little bit closer to the connector. You want to stabilize it.
Okay. After it's lined up, do you just click it in place?
Yep, and this might require a little bit of force. Not a ton, but you gotta just kind of work it. But you're seeing the board's flexing a little bit.
Yeah.
Sometimes if it's really flexing and I'm kind of sketched out about it, I'll put like a finger underneath it here just to support it. I've never had a problem, but I do that, so maybe that's why I never have a problem.
I think that's in place.
Okay, let me take a look here.
Yeah, take a look.
Great job. That is perfectly seated. Awesome.
Okay.
So next we're going to do the 8-pin CPU and 4-pin CPU power. Some only have one 4-pin, others will have 8 pins. Some will have 8 plus 4 or 8 plus 8. If your computer is a potato, it will have none of these. So let's see. So we've got 2 in this system, 2 of the 8 pins, but they just break apart. You can tell these apart from the 8 pins that go to the video card. Like here's one that goes to a video card.
Okay.
See how this has one clip and a little breakaway thing?
Yeah.
These are 2 4s that have these big clips that break away in the middle. So they look kind of similar, but once you get them up close, they are kind of different. So let's grab our 8-pin.
How do you not get confused?
I built a lot of these.
Oh, good. Okay.
Once you build your first one, though, it's pretty simple.
Okay.
You know, it's a lot to take in at first, but
Yeah. So this one, right?
yep. So the 8 pin to the 8 pin.
8-pin. I will hold you, motherboard.
Perfect. And then we've split our 4-pin here, and they are labeled too. Like this one says CPU on it. So if you're wondering if you have the right one, most good power supplies these days are properly labeled.
Then CPU.
It's not the Wild West like it used to be, where it's sort of like, well, good luck.
Does it just go into one?
Yep, and then the other one's just going to hang loose.
Okay. Why is that?
We just don't need it.
Depending on the type of motherboard?
Yep, if it's a higher end board, or it's a board that's designed for overclocking, or it's a CPU that's really high end, like some of those $1,000 Ryzen or Intel chips, the Threadrippers, or some of like the high end i9s, more cores, more threads, more power.
Oh, I see.
What it's doing is it's breaking up, not only is it giving it more power, but most importantly, it's breaking that power load up along more places. So it's like if you ever had a wire that has poor resistance and gets hot, because there's too much electricity trying to go in there. So this mitigates that, and when the power is clean and cool, it gives better flow, better for overclocking, better for stability. So for this being a mid-tier board and having an 8+4, that's pretty cool.
Okay. Okay, what else? Any more wires?
Nope, so right now, let's go ahead and move these
Out of the way.
Yep, out of the way, and you can see I can actually bend these quite a bit. It's the first time you do it, you're like, oh no, I'm gonna start an electrical fire.
Yeah.
But like grab this one and like go ahead and bend it down. So if this was in a case, we'd run these through little grommets and they'd pop out like here and here, just to keep airflow cleaner and just aesthetics. It's airflow and aesthetics, really the main reasons.
Yeah.
Yep. So next we'll go ahead and let's wire up our fans.
Okay, fans. These fans right here?
Yep, yeah, I put them on what looks like a radiator mount, but it's not. It's from an old case, but it holds fans.
Okay, where do the fans go?
So we've got a bunch of different options on this.
Okay.
Let me undo all of these. And let's see, so we've got fan headers, and fan headers are these little things right here, these 4 pins and this little kind of off-center clip. We've got 2 down here, we have 1 here, we have 2 up at the top, and I believe that is all this board has, but that's a fairly decent amount.
So can you place those anywhere in those 3 locations? Or
You can, with some exceptions. Technically, yes, I could plug these into any of these. But on the motherboard, if we look closely, some of these are actually labeled. So this one's labeled AIO pump, and then up here, this is labeled CPU fan, and then the other one is labeled chassis fan.
Okay.
Now the reasons why these are labeled is, one, for organization. When you're into the BIOS later on, you're setting up like what fans you want to go at what speed.
Okay.
You have an idea of what that controls, which is really important. The other reason is some of these are actually tied to sensors. So CPU fan and AIO pump, which is just your water cooling pump, those are getting temperature readings from the CPU. So if you want to set it automatically, so let's say you're loading up a game or a rendering, and the CPU is getting hotter, these will be able to register the temperature from the CPU and go, okay, that's getting hotter, I'm going to increase my fan speed automatically. So that just makes it easier if you want that tied in to the temperature of this, to wire those components in.
I think that is very helpful.
Yep, it's a nice thing to have. So we'll grab, and as far as the rest of them, so there's a bunch of different chassis fans. For that, a lot of it's personal preference. Some people will run certain fans on the back or the bottom to different points of the board. I usually just look at it and go, where's my fan coming from? And where is it? Like the fan's coming from all the way up here, but you're running it like across the board to plug in down here. Like, no, don't do that. So if you've got fans that are on the back or somewhere that are closer to these headers, then I will route them through. So for us, all of ours are pretty equidistant. It doesn't really matter for what we're doing. So let's wire 2 of them up to these.
How do these go in?
So see those 2 little goalpost things that stick out in the sides there?
Yeah. These on this side?
Nope.
Or those on the other side?
These little things right here. Those are the lines.
Oh, yeah.
Those will clip along the sides of this little thing.
Okay. And so right here you can insert 2?
Insert 1 into 1, and then you got it.
Slide it in?
Yep. Just slide it in, and it'll just push on it.
Okay.
There we go.
That was scary.
Do the next one.
Any of the 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, for these, let's measure them. I think one of these might be a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So let's go with this one.
The shorter one.
It's shorter and it's closer. So I was full of crap. It does actually sort of matter for our build.
There
Awesome.
we go. Fan is powered.
So we'll take our next one, and let's actually just, I think this will fit. Let's run it under here and make it cleaner for the top side. So run it under, and then let's plug it into this one's CPU fan, the one that's on the left. So plug it into the one on the right.
So the CPU gets its own fan
Yep.
when the PC is fully built.
Yep, we'll be getting to that before too long here. That's actually going to be our heatsink install.
Oh, okay.
So that's going to be cool. And I believe a little bit of cable management here, keep things nice and neat. We're pretty close to being able to plug in. Actually, no, I think we're actually at the point we're ready for the heatsink.
Okay. What does a heatsink do?
So the heatsink is what cools our processor. The processor and the graphics card are two of the hottest components in a computer. So they have the largest cooling solutions. And for us, for our CPU, there's either liquid cooling or air cooling. We're using just the stock cooler that came with the CPU, which is air cooled. But AMD does a good job. You know, they're not what I'd overclock on or I'd do like crazy performance tuning on, but the AMD CPUs are more than adequate for cooling the CPUs. They're not crazy loud. They look pretty decent. Yep.
Wow. This is intimidating.
There's some stuff going on there, but it's a lot easier than it used to be.
Okay. So
Let's see here, I believe.
does this get placed right on top of the CPU?
It does, but there's a little bit of prep work we're going to need to do before we put that on.
Okay.
So for us, we have these brackets here that might be good for another type of heatsink. These have actually been around forever, like 15 plus years. This doesn't use those, so we're going to have to grab a screwdriver and pull these 4 screws off to get these off the board.
Okay.
Yep.
Can we use this one? Or
Let's get another head on there. That one's a little
tiny?
Yeah, that was great for our M.2, but I think it's going to make life miserable on that heatsink. And there you go.
So remove the screws.
Yep.
And then there's 4, one for each of them. Okay. Wow.
Those might be torqued down pretty good.
Yes, they are. I have no finger strength.
And careful when you're using the screwdriver. I see a lot of people do this their first times. I should have warned you.
Yeah.
When you're using a screwdriver, you don't want to have that screwdriver come up and like,
Oh, damn it.
we might need a,
Yeah.
I think that screwdriver is very delicate. Let's see.
Wow.
Yeah, there we go. I started that one. You can do the, just want to make sure it wasn't like stuck on there or something, but no, it's good. It's always sketchy when you're putting what feels like a lot of torque onto tiny, sensitive electronic components.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to break something.
And don't worry about that. It's okay. It's something you want to avoid, but I've yet to have a problem where I've dropped a screw onto something on a board and it's caused like any noticeable damage. And there we go. And let's lift our piece of plastic up.
Oh, so you remove the whole thing.
Yep.
Okay.
So that plastic is actually attached to a back plate that is behind the motherboard, but that little plate is what these screws are going to thread into. So we need to do the same for this side.
Come on, screw. Oh, I don't want to jam down the motherboard.
Sometimes what I will do is I will brace like one hand on this side of the screw like this. That way, as you're torquing up here, the screwdriver can't slip off and go into the board.
Okay.
This gives you more control, and that way you can put comfortably a little bit more force behind it.
Screws are always the boring part.
Yeah, things like this are the fun, you know, or not so fun, tedious parts.
I gotta be careful. My shaky hands.
So there's probably a reason they don't put a lot of components right around the screw point, the screw holes. If you look, it's pretty devoid of surface mount components in that little area.
That made me sweat.
You did a good job.
Okay.
So
What
next,
is next?
we have the heatsink. And a little bit of explaining, we're just going to use the stock thermal paste that's on this. We're just doing a simple build here. But these come pre-applied, this little thin strip of thermal paste this is good enough for basic usage. We're not overclocking. We're not doing anything crazy with this. We're just building a basic build. So for this, we're going to leave this on. There are plenty of different ways to put on, or plenty of different thermal pastes, and there's all kinds of debates that have been raging on for years about the best way to put thermal paste on, whether it's a ball, a line, an X, a circle with a smiley face. Mostly, as long as you have good coverage, you don't have too much, but too little, you have enough. Mostly doesn't matter, but I'm not going to get into that debate now because that will be raging long past when we are gone. But so we have our 4 screws here, and we have our 4 screws here in a rectangle.
Okay.
So with our alignment on this, go ahead and grab this
Okay.
and hold it over the system.
So is there any preference?
It can either go this way or this way. I might put this on the left side because it sticks out a little bit more. It could interfere with our RAM if we ever upgrade in the future.
I see.
So what we want to do is gently just put that on top of the CPU with those screws lined up with those holes. And it'll just kind of sit on there. We're going to have to screw them in to kind of get them to bite. So let's see, there we are. Let's grab our screwdriver there. And let's see.
Begin the insertion.
So we want to have one, hold it with your hand, gently push down on that. Move it over. See, let me check something here. Can I see something real quick?
Yep.
Yep. So what we're going to do is we're going to get one of them started here. See how that's starting to thread?
Yeah.
Still holding down with my hand.
Okay.
Going to go over, make sure I can't see. Head is in the way. Line this one up. Kind of like you do a tire on a car. That sound is normal. There's this little spring screw in here.
A little coil.
Yep. So just push down.
So many little sound effects.
Yep, so those are biting now. This is held down.
Okay.
So now we want to do that same thing to the other 2 screws.
Is that all you screw?
There's 4 of them, so I just get them down because sometimes, like the force to put this on, makes the heatsink kind of want to lean. So I kind of hold my hand, get one kind of locked in, then I go to the other side and lock it in so it's diagonal across, and that just makes it easier. So if you go from here to here, you have one side in, but not the other, and you know that it could damage the CPU if you torque it down a lot.
Okay.
So we just like a tire, you go kind of diagonal and across.
Okay.
In different patterns. So we've done those 2. Let's go over to this one here.
Okay. And how do you know when to stop?
The cool thing about these is that the little springs in these screws will only allow you to tighten this in so far.
Oh, really?
Yep, so this will actually stop itself.
How do you know when it's stopped?
It'll pretty much become impossible to screw. We don't want to screw it all the way now, so we just want to screw in like maybe a few more turns.
Okay.
And now let's go to our other corner over here. Get that one. And there's a million different ways to install heatsinks. This is just one that AMD uses, but there's as many of them as there are days in the year.
I think it's telling me to stop.
Okay, so go ahead and do this one again, the first one that we started with.
Okay. Is that the end point when that's hit the bottom?
The screw will just kind of reach a resistance point where the spring won't allow it to. It'll kind of bottom out against itself.
I feel like this one's reached that point too.
Okay, cool. So make sure, now go do all 4. Make sure they've all, I don't think we've done this one yet to make sure that it's
all the way down.
Yep, and sometimes you just got to double check, if you're not quite sure.
Yeah, this is kind of tricky.
This is one of the sketchier parts, feels like.
Yeah, because it's right on top of the CPU.
It takes a lot to kill a CPU, especially, so we saw earlier the CPU had that giant cover on top of it. That's the integrated heat spreader, so the CPU's core is actually underneath that. Back in the day, that core on a number of CPUs used to be exposed, and you could roll the heatsink or put it on improper pressure and crush the core, which killed your CPU and made you want to go home and cry into a bucket. I didn't do that. My friend did that. It sucked.
Okay.
Okay, cool. You double check real quick?
Yeah, double check my work.
Good. Let's see. Let's check these ones. That's good. As soon as it stops, let's see, so this one, these aren't actually in. But it's cool because we did our pattern, so I'm going to back these off a little bit here.
Okay.
Because we don't have one side. We applied even pressure across the CPU at the two different sides.
Okay.
So the only way you're really going to get into like trouble is if you do like two of them on one side and it's kind of like almost popping up.
Okay.
But so let's go down and that one looks like it's in. Let's go.
So how many times have you personally built a motherboard?
I've lost track. I've lost track. It's been these probably only two or three of this heatsink. But over the years, I've done probably 150, 200 builds or more. And everyone's a little bit different. Oh, there's only a few of them that have had like similar mounting brackets. So I do kind of weird stuff. But yeah, that is now installed. If you actually grab the screwdriver and you can kind of go around and feel all of them are nice and tight.
Okay.
And that's always, it's a good habit to double check.
Oh yeah. Okay. I totally feel it. Yeah. Until it stopped moving.
Yep.
Yep. Perfect, Robert.
Great. So let's grab our cable now and plug that into our CPU socket.
CPU socket. This one, right?
Yep. And let's see.
Turn it around.
Yep. Great, so that is installed. Congrats,
Okay.
You just installed your first heatsink. I know that was a little sketchy, but
yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Thank you.
So we've got one more part to put in here before we can get this booting up, and that is our video card.
Video card. This one?
Yep.
Okay.
So we have a GeForce RTX 2060 that we're going to be putting in this. A nice mid-tier video card.
Okay.
And we saved this for last because they're big. It's a lot easier to work other cables around them. And I like getting everything else situated. Like if this was in the way of if we install this earlier and we're trying to do the heatsink, it gets in the way of all these screws and it makes things difficult. One thing that I did want to cover on earlier, technically we could have installed this heatsink earlier on because it doesn't obstruct too many things, but I saved that toward after we did all the cabling because there are some heat sinks that are just huge, like the big air coolers or some of the liquid coolers that might overlap certain things. So I like being able to plug in these cables before they become kind of walled in with a giant tower of metal. So that's kind of personal preference depending on what kind of build, but that's why I did that.
Okay. What's next?
So
How
next,
does this get inserted?
Let's go ahead and pull off the little thing there. And let's pull off the plastic.
Okay.
Everyone loves peeling plastic. I hate it. I don't know why. People love it, so cool. Go ahead, Sarah.
ASMR.
Peel plastic for people.
Okay. I'll try to make this as enjoyable as possible.
I just don't see the appeal. I'm sorry.
No, you have to listen to it. Listen to it.
I don't even like the sound.
You know?
No, I hate the sound. Maybe I'm just broken. I don't know.
Not bad.
Cool.
Enjoyable.
To each their own. Cool.
Okay.
So we're going to put it, we have two different slots we can put it in. We're going to put it in the top slot. So first thing we want to do, go ahead and push your finger on this little tab here. Push it down. Yep, so that unlocks it.
Okay.
And then now we're going to put these big brackets toward the back.
This?
Yep. Line it up and just drop it in.
And
make sure it's nice and straight.
Does it click in just like the...
It will. Make sure it's nice and straight. You're kind of at like a weird angle.
Okay.
There's nothing for you to really bend, so you don't have to worry about. Yep,
and
now
then
push,
you just push
nice
down?
and straight down. Yep.
Okay. Let's try to keep straight. Okay.
Might have to rock it front to back a little bit.
I feel like it interferes with this one.
It shouldn't. Let's see. Nope, we just
Oh,
have to.
okay. Just slide it in there. Okay.
Yeah, they're kind of weird. Okay. So that is installed. If this was a case, we would, of course, screw this down, but we don't have any screw mount, so it's just going to sit like that.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and grab our power cable for that, and that is...
So, is it going to be in here somewhere?
Our 4-pin Molex is back. How'd that get here?
Power cable. That one?
Here we go. Yep, this one. So we have a 8-pin cable on here, our connector, and different video cards have different connectors. Some will have a 6-pin, some will have 2 8s. If it's super crazy high end, it'll have like 3 8-pins. So we want to make sure whatever cables that are on here or whatever power plugs, we plug them all in.
Okay.
In this case, it is an 8-pin, and so there's 2 of these. We only need 1. It doesn't matter if we use the one in the middle or the one at the end. It's personal preference and whatever kind of looks cleaner.
Okay.
Let's grab, for this build, let's do the one in the end. And so what you need to do, there's these 2 cables here.
Yes.
And this needs to connect to the side and kind of clip on.
To this?
Yep. And they get kind of weird.
They do get weird. I have no idea. Okay.
You got it? Cool.
That,
Yeah, it'll kind of come off. You got to hold it on there.
Okay, I'll
It's not
hold
the
it
most
together.
brilliant of designed connectors.
okay.
Okay, so we've got our clip, just like our other power plugs. That clip will go to this little latch here. And we'll want to stabilize the video card with one hand.
Okay.
And probably back here in the middle, because otherwise the card will rock forwards.
Okay.
If it was in a case and it was screwed down, we'd be good, but we have to hold it. Just make sure it doesn't rock. It's also good too for people at home. Be sure to screw in your video card.
Okay.
Cool, awesome, and that's it. It's nice and level, it's in there. So we'll do a little bit of wire management here. It's not the cleanest of setup, but cool, that's at least out of the way of critical things. So we have all of our major components in here. It's time to actually grab a monitor, keyboard, mouse, power cable, and we'll start this for the first time.
Okay, I'm excited. Oh.
All right, so we'll be back in a second. And we are back. So now we've got our system set up with a monitor, keyboard, mouse. We've powered everything. So Sarah, you ready to get this powered on?
Yeah, I'm excited. Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so let's flip our power supply on.
Okay.
And the first thing we're gonna see, you see that light that lit up?
Yeah.
That means we're already in a good place. If you flip your power supply on, pretty much every motherboard I've dealt with recently will have some sort of an LED somewhere on it, whether it's green, blue, red, something that just indicates it's getting power. So at this phase, if you see nothing on the board, double check all your power connections, make sure your power supply is plugged in, and just double check all those little things.
So I guess I connected all the cables correctly?
You did, it's powering on. So next thing you want to do is let's go ahead and get this thing started.
Okay, how are you gonna start it? Like, is there a button?
Normally there would be. We built this without a case, and I didn't bother pulling a power button out of a case because I couldn't be bothered, and I like doing things a little bit more of a fun way. Okay. So we're actually going to spark this up, metaphorically, not literally, with a screwdriver connecting 2 pins on the motherboard. Sounds a little sketchy. It's not dangerous. I do this a lot on test benches. So what we want to do is, on the bottom of most boards, there's this kind of row of connectors. This board is nicely labeled out. So we have power LED, that's the little power button light that you see on most cases. Our power switch, reset, which is the reset button, and then HDD LED, which is that little blinky light on your case that tells you your hard drive is doing stuff. So we're not going to wire any of those up, but we are going to use the screwdriver to tap the power switch connectors and power it on. Now that's just 2 cables. All that happens when you hit that power button on your computer, it just bridges 2 contacts together and the system starts up. So that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
So we're going to grab this, get to those 2 pins right there, the power switch.
What?
Tap it, and that's all.
It's ready to go.
I'm not necessarily recommending that you all do this at home, but it is a way to start a system. So now we're just going to look at the monitor and see if it gets post, or power on self-test, which means that it's actually working and we're seeing things on the display. Yes!
High five.
Congratulations. That is awesome. That is, you've just built your first computer. It's functioning. We're in BIOS. So the first thing we want to do, we're in BIOS, but we really want to check and make sure that our temperatures and everything are working perfectly fine. We also want to check and make sure, well, we're on the screen real quick, just that our RAM is showing up. So we're showing 32 gigs of memory. We have 32 gig kit in here. So both of our sticks, you installed them correctly.
Yeah.
So awesome. That's all showing up. We'll go over to our advanced mode here.
And which component do you think is the one that you should check the most, or the most important? Is there any one in particular? Or
When you first boot up, I like checking to see the heatsink.
heating?
Because that's the one thing. You've got thermal paste to deal with. You've got a bunch of tensioning, as we saw earlier in the video, with tightening the screws down. There's a lot of little steps that if one of them is missed or not done correctly, it can lead to the system overheating. And if it's going to be overheating, it won't damage. Most modern computers are smart enough to throttle themselves down, which means slow themselves. But it's going to slow itself to a snail pace, and it's an issue we want to address right out of the gate.
Okay.
So we're going to look here. We're sitting at 33C on CPU. So we're doing pretty good here. And we have the fans, I think, set to silent. So that fan is just spinning, doing almost nothing.
Oh.
So let's go ahead and go over to our Q fan control. Because earlier we were talking about plugging in these different fans, different places on the motherboard. And that applies to this. There's plenty of different ways you can get aftermarket fans that have aftermarket fan controllers. But we just went with a simple one on this to kind of explain everything. So we're in BIOS here. We have our CPU fan, and we plug that correctly into the fan that goes to our CPU heatsink. So if we go here from the default setting to full speed, you hear that crank up. I think you can hear it on the microphone. And we'll go over to silent. And if you see, as soon as I click on that, this graph changes, and now the fan is running much lower. It doesn't start ramping up until way over here at the far end. So this is preferencing sound over thermals. If we go over to standard, another automatic fan profile, now it's going to start ramping that fan a little bit earlier. And if we go all the way to turbo, we're telling the CPU, look, as soon as it starts getting hot, ramp that fan. I want maximum cooling performance. But we can also go to manual. Manual is cool. It allows you to dial it in for exactly what you want. For me, I have my own personal preference. I like bringing things up to about like 50, 60, 65% on the fan. And a lot of this depends on what fan you have. Some fans are quieter or louder at different RPMs. So I'll set something a little more aggressive like this. And let's see, let's bump this maybe a little bit and apply. So I don't like hearing fans ramp up and down a lot. I like it to be more consistent and then only ramp up at the very end when it absolutely has to. So a lot of it's personal preference and just finding that sweet spot that works for your build and what makes you comfortable.
Okay. So I'm glad this all worked out. Honestly, I was like super scared that it would not turn on.
And no, it worked out great. That is always sketchy though, that moment of like, I've had so many of those moments over the years where we're like, please boot. So, yeah, everything seems like it's up and running. You've done an awesome job.
Thank you,
so
Robert,
congrats
for
on building your
showing me
first
this.
functioning computer.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm surprised this all went well.
No, you did a great job. So thank you everyone for watching this. If you like this, definitely like and subscribe for more content. If there's anything you want to see or you have any suggestions for stuff to do in upcoming videos, definitely leave something in the comments below and we will check that out. But for now, take care. Thanks for watching and bye.
See ya.
Awesome.
Yeah.